Okay, we're back with our guest, Miss Connie Hall Scott, and she was telling us the story of the young lady who committed suicide in the late '60s, and how she basically was in the process of shooting herself, and she experienced this kind of time dilation, which I assume means that from her perspective, time was like slowing down, if not standing still. But once the trigger had been pulled, it was essentially too late, and she was overcome with this sense of regret. Is that correct?
Yeah, from everything I've learned so far or heard about it, yeah, that is what Victoria Bragg said, and it fits along with the story, and I'd love to find out who she is. I have run across people like my dad and his former police partner, as well as the coroner, who remember that it happened, but just really not a whole lot of details. I have learned that the girl was from out of town, so, it's not quite as easy to, I guess, find information on her.
Right, right. And at the time, when they were, initially investigating, I'm sure it was just, although it was unfortunate, I mean, it was just another suicide case that they had to investigate.
Sure.
And nobody was thinking, well, 50 years later, we'll be talking about this as an interesting paranormal situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And there's no reason really to believe it was anything other than suicide. The sad part is, that she seems to be stuck there. I say that, but actually this year, I have started to wonder because for about 3 years after Victoria came, the lights would come on. I'm estimating 1 out of every 3 tours, which is phenomenal. But this year, I have saw really no sign of her. So I don't know if that means that, I'm just not there at the right time, or perhaps she has moved on.
Well, I guess we can hope that she has.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Because, I mean, the idea of being stuck there since the late 60s, I mean, my goodness.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's terribly sad. But like I mentioned, several people have come along. I have a different attorney friend other than Randy, who moved into the building. It's a 5-story building from a different part of town. And within the first week of his moving in, both he and his wife, I'm friends with both of them, had contacted me, each without the other knowing, saying, hey, this building is really haunted. And they would tell me the things that happened to Josh. And, it was pretty interesting.
Wow.
Seems to be very active, or at least at one point was. I can't really say in the last several months if anything has went on, but, for several years it was quite active.
So let me ask you this. How far back, have you always been interested in the paranormal, or was this something that you got interested in later, or what's the story of that?
Well, for me, I'm kind of an unlikely candidate to be involved in paranormal at all, because I was that kid in the early mid-'70s who was allowed to watch Salem's Lot.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah, the vampire.
Yeah,
that was
little boy vampire.
Yeah.
And we lived in a large house up on a hill, kind of away from the other houses, and my parents would send me to bed, and it was all the way at the other end of the house.
Oops.
And I would be, this like 6-year-old kid laying in bed and literally pulling my covers up to my neck, waiting for that little boy to rap on my window.
Oh my God! Wait! Now, because see, there's people who haven't seen this movie, so let's set this up.
Okay.
You really hit on it. All right, guys. Now, if you haven't seen the movie, Salem's Lot, based on a Stephen King book. This time, vampires and all over the place. And so this little boy is, changed into a vampire. So he's stalking one of his childhood friends. And so one night, this vampire boy just floats out of nowhere, out of thin air, out of some mist.
In his pajamas.
Right? And he's floating outside of this other boy's window. And he's scratching at the window. And I'm telling you guys, if you have not seen this movie, that scene, when he's floating out there in those pajamas with these fangs sticking out of his mouth, and scratching at that window, you will not forget it.
And the look on his face, it's like a sickening happiness. I don't know how to describe it, but
yeah,
it really
just a
impacted me.
diabolical grin.
Yes.
Like it's totally effective. I mean, so the effect of horror that they were trying to achieve, they succeeded. So yes, so I had to tell the audience about that because you mentioned
I'm
it.
glad you did. It's worthy. It's worthy of watching if you haven't, if you're into that kind of, the horror genre. But for a 6-year-old girl, it was very thematic.
Not typical.
No, not typical. But, I think in those days, more so than these days, a lot of parents, or at least mine did, would let us watch, all those scary movies and not give a whole lot of thought to it.
I was the same way. I mean, I was, again, I know, there's a lot of over-parenting, hyper-parenting, new age parenting, but I was the same way. I got to watch those movies. And now, keep in mind, it was a lot different. Horror movies were a lot different. You didn't see people getting their heads chopped off.
True.
And, just arms and legs flying. It was a little bit different then. But,
yeah, it was more of a psychological terror instead of too much gore.
It still scared the hell out of us.
Heck yeah.
But, it's not something that traumatized us.
Well, no. And I say it traumatized me just a little bit. As I lie in bed at the other end of the house, wondering if he was going to come.
Right.
But yeah, back to what you asked me,
yes.
it was, I always watched the movies, but they left a negative residue for me. I would just, it would bother me forever, for days after I watched those types of movies.
Sure.
In fact, I literally slept with a lamp on up into my early 20s until I got married and, moved into, at that time, my husband's home.
Sure.
So I was kind of a scaredy cat. And then my dad and mom renovated the Wink Theater. Like I said earlier, it's a 1939 building. And when we reopened, they invited me to work there as a artistic director. And as I would take people around on tours talking about, the history of the theater, I started telling some of the ghost stories that other people had shared with me since the reopening. And, that really is what led into people telling me more stories about other places in town, and I love history. So that's really how Dalton Ghost Tours was born, from, my time at the Wink Theater and learning more history about haunted locations in town.
Wow. So I want to go back to, because I think this is so interesting, what you were saying about these scary movies.
Yes.
And the reason why I'm saying that is because I really do think that people who were kids in the 60s and 70s, like we were, and of course we're dating ourselves, but who cares?
Who cares?
I think almost, I won't say in all cases, but I think a lot of the people who are in the paranormal today, who are of our generation, I bet you they have a similar story.
Yeah, I would think so. What's your story? Which movie really affected you, if any?
Well, it's not one. It's not one. You mentioned Salem's Lot, so of course that's on the list. Okay.
Yeah.
But there were now let me ask you this: did you grow up in Georgia?
I did.
Okay, so you remember, and I love saying this because there's going to be people who live in other cities who don't know what we're talking about. Then they'll start Googling everything. Then of course you remember Channel 17. Before it was the Superstation?
Yeah.
Before it was, Turner?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Well, in the 70s, they showed all the horror movies. And I would watch these things, Friday night, Saturday afternoon. I'd watch these things back to back to back to back.
Oh, wow.
And,
yeah.
Of course, they scared me to death. And
yeah.
there was one, and this is going to sound silly today, but when you're 10 years old, there was a werewolf film that I watched one night, and he was trying to get into this house to attack this woman, He was outside the house, and it was one of these large antebellum style plantation type houses, like in the bayou or something.
Oh yeah.
Okay. And so it didn't really have much security. It had these really flimsy French doors and things like that. And so he's out there banging on the door. And every time he banged on the door, the hinges got a little bit looser.
Oh.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
And so he knocks this door down. Bang, he knocks it down. And so every time he knocks the door down, she runs to another room.
Oh.
And every time she runs to another room, he knocks that door down. And so I'm watching this. And of course, my 10-year-old brain is like, okay, if this creature can knock down a locked door, you can't stop him.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
You can't stop him. If he's strong enough to do that, you can't stop him. And so I would lay in bed and wonder about the doors in our house.
Oh.
How strong, the deadbolts, how strong are these doors? Are these doors reliable? And it was just terrifying.
Oh, yes.
Okay. And so that's just one that jumps out at me because I remember so vividly. And so, yes, you get interested in these things, and that leads to an interest in the unknown. And in the 70s and 80s, there was no internet. So, information about the paranormal, you either had to go to the library or something, or occasionally something was on TV, right? Occasionally.
Sure. Or someone tells you this story and you kind of, build your information base that way.
Yes.
Accurate or not.
Oh, yes. And that was the thing about, either a family member telling a ghost story or a friend or what have you. It's interesting and it may be creepy. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking, no, they pulling my leg.
Yeah.
But so I'm sure for me that was part of where my interest came from. And again, it was a lot different then because, there was only 5 or 6 channels, and if there was a really good scary movie coming on, you couldn't DVR it. You had to be there when it was on.
Oh, yes.
So
and if you missed the beginning, you missed the beginning.
Yeah, I mean it's so different now because you can almost see anything you want anytime, right? But it was, and I'm sure the people who are listening who are like 25 years old are saying, what the hell are they talking about?
Yeah, but we have great imaginations, Right. I think largely because we didn't have the internet in our early years, and we had to have fantasies.
You ever wonder? Isn't it hard now to remember before the internet?
Yeah, especially as a writer.
Yeah.
I'm like, how did I used to get all this information before I could, the internet was fairly new, and I guess I'm aging myself again. But you would have to literally go to the library or conduct interviews. It was a lot. There was more work involved.
Well, yes, you're right. And of course, to many people, when you say research, people hear the word Google.
Exactly.
And I get it because we all use Google.
Oh, yeah.
But people must understand there was a lot of research done before the internet.
Oh, yes.
And so, you must remember that. And it's interesting for people who are of a certain age who lived in a pre-internet era and now we're in the internet era, how we go about accumulating information because, there's a lot of garbage online.
There's so much. Yes. And you can't, I hate to say this because it doesn't even need to be said, really, but you can't believe everything. And a lot of these younger generations, I think, my kids included, I have 3 teenagers, like if, for example, my son wants to argue with me, this sounds bad, about taking steroids. And I'm like, kid, you can't do that. And I'm like, okay, let me do some research just so I can argue with you more effectively. And he'll go do research, but he'll go to the sites that are very biased to what he wants, how he wants his argument to come out. He'll
go to the Steroids Are Cool website.
Yeah, exactly. They're not going to hurt you. They'll never hurt you. That type of thing. And, it's just, I don't know, and I think that this is getting off on a tangent, but
No, no,
I
no.
think that news channels, whether it be TV, radio, or whatever, um, are guilty these days of mostly not being unbiased, and I think that's kind of a shame.
Yeah, you know what? You're right, and it's a very good point. I think that, and I think there's a couple of, I don't know if the reasons. I think there's a couple of angles here on that. I think part of it is now news is 24 hours a day,
Yes,
7 days a week, right? Okay. Now,
absolutely.
if you're talking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, of course, at some point, you run out of real things to talk about.
Yeah,
And you start talking about nonsense. Okay?
that is true.
And that is, see, that's part of what's happening. So, 35 or 40% of what's being talked about is ridiculous nonsense. That's number one. Number two, it's a business. And at the end of the day, these news agencies are corporations. Okay? And so,
Oh, absolutely.
exactly. So their bottom line is their bottom line, and they're going to talk to this particular group of folks, or that particular group of folks, or this other particular group of folks, and they're going to play to that base audience. It's and support the sponsors, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's really what's going on.
Oh yeah,
I
and it's the same way with newspapers.
Same way with what?
Oh, newspapers.
Oh, newspaper. Well, yeah. I mean, and the newspaper industry is in such is on life support. So,
Yeah.
They'll just about print anything now
Oh yeah.
to get people to
And that's
read.
kind of a shame too.
Right, right. But then I could flip it around. I could flip it around and say it's partly our fault because we consume it, which means we're giving them permission to do it. We're eating it up like candy.
Absolutely.
And so it's we are, as a general public, partly to blame, right? We love
We
we
absolutely
love
are.
scandals. We love scandals. We love drama. We love all of these type of things. So I think you're right, and I think it's just a cycle that we're caught up in. Somebody said
Oh, yeah.
somebody said the other day something like, well, there's 11 more months until the next presidential election, which means
Uh-huh.
that nobody will be interested for another 10 months. No. So, nobody even cares until the month before the election, in other words.
Yes.
And it's funny,
Yeah.
but they're
Yes,
they're
you're right.
Yeah. So, you're kind of asking for it. So, what do you have coming? Oh! I know what I wanted to talk to you about. You and I both participated in the writing and publication of the book with Stellium and Annette Munich. And Annette told me yesterday.
Yes.
Annette told me yesterday, or what, maybe it was earlier today, that it had actually gone back to number one for a very brief period today. And so I was really happy about that. So do you remember, how did you come to participate in that?
I think that, in fact, it was Richard Ruland
Oh, okay.
who contacted me. The book was almost finished, and I have a writing background well before I ever started, the tours and those things. And he just said that Annette had dropped a story or something like that. Would I be interested in doing one? So, there's this story that I'm halfway working on that I just thought I'll just go and write something about that. And it's just an amazing story, and that's how that got in there.
Good. And I know she said, she told me today that there's going to be a volume 2. that I guess it's going to be in the spring or summer. And so hopefully we can both jump back on board because it was a lot of fun.
Oh yeah.
Because you know
It really was.
the short story format is like my favorite kind of writing.
Yeah, I have ADHD. I hate to even say that, but I do, and so I'm more likely to get one of those out than I've got 3 books on the back burner, and I'll work on one a little while and then let it go for a spell.